In the humid, salt-laced air of October 14, 1888, in the coastal town of Beaufort, South Carolina, a shocking discovery was made that would forever stain the gilded pages of the region's history. Responding to a persistent and foul odor reported by neighbors, an odor the prestigious Whitmore family had dismissed for weeks as a problem with the marsh tides, a young and ambitious deputy sheriff named Thomas Miller used a crowbar to force open the attic door of the stately Whitmore mansion. What he found inside was a scene of such calculated, artistic horror that it defied all comprehension. This was not a crime of passion or greed, but of something far more ancient and patient. The attic did not contain rotting refuse. It contained a silent, watching audience. Arranged in neat rows, seated in small wooden chairs, were what appeared at first glance to be 100 life-sized porcelain dolls. They were dressed in immaculate Victorian finery, lace, satin, and velvet, with glass eyes that stared blankly into the dusty shafts of light. But as Deputy Miller's lantern drew closer, the illusion shattered. The skin was not porcelain. It was human. The hair was not spun wool, but real hair, intricately styled. He had stumbled upon the Whitmore family's collection, a gallery of the dead. Subsequent investigations would reveal a reign of terror that had operated in plain sight for over 2 decades, beginning around 1868. The official count of victims, or acquisitions, as the family's journals would later call them, stopped at 97, though investigators believed the true number surpassed 100. They were almost exclusively young women and girls, with ages documented from as young as 12 to no older than 25. These were the city's forgotten, orphans, drifters, and indigents who had been taken in by the Whitmores' celebrated charity, only to become permanent additions to their Macabre exhibition. Due to the standing of the families implicated in the subsequent investigation, the complete records of the case, including the names of all involved, were sealed by a state judge for a period of 100 years. Now those records are unsealed. They tell a story far more disturbing than the initial headlines ever dared to suggest. For the most chilling discovery was not the rows of preserved bodies, but the meticulously kept sales ledger found in a locked safe. The question that has haunted historians is not just what the Whitmores did, but for whom they were doing it. Before we continue with the grim secrets of the Whitmore family and the truth behind the attic of 100 dolls, if this story already intrigues you, and you feel that pull to uncover forgotten history, then consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell. We are building a community here for true mystery seekers, those who aren't afraid to look into the darkest corners of the past. This channel is for only the bravest among you, the ones who want the full, unfiltered story. To see just how far this story reaches, tell us in the comments what state or city you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see our community of investigators span the globe. Now let's step back in time, into the world that allowed such a nightmare to fester in plain sight. To understand how the horrors in the Whitmore attic could remain hidden for 2 decades, one must first understand the Beaufort of the late 19th century. The year of the discovery, 1888, placed the town firmly in the post-Reconstruction era, a period of fraught and fragile social restructuring. Beaufort, with its strategic port and antebellum grandeur, was a microcosm of the changing South. Its population of roughly 3,500 was a tense mix of the old guard, white planter families who had lost their fortunes in the war but clung fiercely to their social supremacy, and a large, newly freed African-American population striving to build lives amidst systemic oppression. The economy was slowly rebuilding, not on cotton, but on the back of phosphate mining, the so-called river gold dredged from the surrounding waterways. This created a new class of industrialists and brought an influx of transient laborers, both black and white, who lived on the fringes of society. As described in the South Carolina Gazetteer of 1883 Beaufort was a town of stark contrasts, where mansions of breathtaking beauty stand not a quarter mile from hovels of the most pitiable squalor. It was a society with a brutally rigid hierarchy. At the apex were families like the Whitmores. Dr. Elias Whitmore and his wife, Isabella, were the undisputed pillars of Beaufort society. Elias, then 62, was not a practicing physician in the traditional sense. having inherited a vast fortune that negated any need to work. His family's wealth, originally from Sea Island cotton, had been shrewdly reinvested in shipping and the booming phosphate trade. He styled himself a naturalist and anthropologist, a gentleman scholar. His private library was renowned throughout the state, and his contributions to the local historical society and the nascent Beaufort College were substantial. Archived town records show his name on the founding charters of no fewer than 5 civic institutions. He was seen as the intellectual and financial bedrock of the community. Isabella Whitmore, 58, was his perfect counterpart. She was the town's benevolent matriarch, celebrated for her piety and boundless charity. While Elias curated culture, Isabella curated souls. Her primary project was the Whitmore Respite for Young Women, an informal, private charity she ran from a guest house on their sprawling waterfront property. The Beaufort Gazette sang her praises regularly. An 1885 article titled, "An Angel in Our Midst Gushes." Mrs. Isabella Whitmore continues her blessed work, offering shelter, sustenance, and moral guidance to those unfortunate girls whom society has forgotten. She is a testament to Christian virtue. This respite is precisely why the discovery of the Whitmore's crimes was so tragically delayed. The victims were selected from a population that was, by design, invisible. They were vagrants, newly arrived and friendless girls seeking work at the port, orphans discharged from underfunded state institutions, or young women cast out by their families. When a girl entered the Whitmore Respite, she was effectively removed from public view. Isabella would announce, weeks or months later, that a suitable position had been found for the girl, as a maid for a wealthy family in Charleston, a governess in Savannah, or even that she had been sent to live with distant relatives up north. In an era with no centralized records, no social security system, and limited communication, these explanations were accepted without question. Who would dare to doubt the word of the saintly Mrs. Whitmore? To do so would be social suicide. The town's transient population provided a constant, untraceable supply, and the Whitmore's sterling reputation was the ultimate shield. Beaufort was a town that saw only what it wanted to see: the graceful verandas, the Gentile society, the comforting illusion of order. It willfully ignored the whispers from the fringes and the silent disappearances, because the alternative was simply too monstrous to contemplate. The Whitmore's deception was a masterpiece of social theater, performed daily on the public stage of Beaufort society. Their home was not just a residence, but a curated exhibition of respectability. Lavish garden parties were common, with Elias holding court on the veranda, discussing Darwinian theory or the phrenological absurdities of the day, while Isabella moved gracefully among the wives of judges and businessmen, a gentle smile on her face, inquiring after their children and complimenting their attire. Their performance was so flawless, so utterly convincing, that to suspect them of anything untoward would have been seen as a sign of madness or malicious envy. Elias Whitmore's cover as a naturalist and anthropologist was his most potent tool of misdirection. He frequently gave lectures at the Beaufort College on topics like the preservation of biological specimens for scientific study. Archived flyers for these events exist. In an 1882 lecture, he reportedly enthralled his audience by detailing the complex process of animal taxidermy, using a beautifully preserved snowy egret as his example. He spoke of arsenic soaps for warding off decay and the delicate art of replacing organic eyes with glass replicas to capture the living essence. You might wonder how no one made the connection. The answer is simple. He hid his work in plain sight, cloaking the methods of his murders in the accepted language of science. When neighbors once commented on a persistent, cloying chemical smell emanating from his carriage house, Elias was mortifyingly apologetic. He explained with a self-deprecating laugh that a taxidermy experiment on a large alligator had gone terribly awry, and he vowed to be more careful. The community sympathized with the eccentric scholar and his smelly hobby. Isabella's deception was more intimate and in many ways more insidious. Her Whitmore Respite for Young Women was her stage. She would be seen in town with a new girl on her arm, purchasing fabric or a warm meal for her. The girl would be quiet, often gaunt and timid, looking upon Mrs. Whitmore with an expression of pure, desperate gratitude. This public display was crucial. Then, a few months later, at a ladies' church auxiliary meeting, Isabella would produce a letter. "Wonderful news," she would announce. "Dear little Sarah or Mary or Eliza has written from Philadelphia. Her new family simply adores her." She would then read a stilted, overly formal letter detailing a happy new life. A letter she had, of course, penned herself. These performances quelled all suspicion and reinforced her image as a selfless savior. The warning signs were there, but each was neatly explained away. Mr. Silas Croft, the proprietor of Croft's Mercantile, often filled strange orders for the Whitmores. "An unusual quantity of plaster of Paris, Dr. Whitmore," he once remarked in 1886. "Building a new statue for the garden?" Elias smiled knowingly. "Something of the sort, Silas. A study in classical forms." The order also included carbolic acid, arsenic, and a special order of a dozen pairs of blue glass eyes from a German catalog, the most expensive kind, used for high-end dolls. Croft found it odd for a childless couple, but the Whitmore account was his most profitable. He simply labeled Dr. Whitmore an eccentric and loaded the wagon. The Whitmore's success depended on a network of unwitting enablers, men of power and influence who were blinded by friendship and social protocol. The first was Sheriff Robert Beaumont. A portly man in his late 60s, Beaumont's primary concern was maintaining the genteel peace. When a transient worker at the phosphate docks would report a daughter or friend missing, one who was last seen heading for the Whitmore respite, the sheriff would sigh wearily. "Son, these girls come and go," he is quoted as saying in one deputy's log. "Mrs. Whitmore finds them good, honest work. They don't have the decency to send a thank-you note, is all. Now stop wasting my time. WITH, tie letter E40, tie letter E23, tie letter E37, tie letter E2D, tie letter E07 of vagrants." To him, Isabella was not a suspect. She was an ally in managing the town's undesirable population. The second and most critical enabler was Dr. Alastair Finch. As the town's only formally educated physician besides Elias himself, Finch viewed Whitmore as a peer. Over cigars and brandy in Elias' library, Elias would consult with Finch. "Alastair," he might begin, "purely as a hypothetical for my preservation work. What would be the ideal compound to maintain the suppleness of skin tissue post-mortem, while also ensuring complete sterilization?" Dr. Finch, flattered by the intellectual query, would offer his medical opinion, suggesting glycerine solutions or discussing the antiseptic properties of formaldehyde. Never once suspecting the true nature of the specimens Elias was working on. These conversations provided Elias with the expert knowledge he needed to refine his horrific craft. The trust between these men, built on class, education, and shared social standing, became an impenetrable shield that hid a charnel house in plain sight. The unraveling of the Whitmore family's two-decade reign of terror began not with a thunderclap, but with a series of small, discordant notes that finally formed a horrifying melody. The first note was a child's shoe. In August of 1888, a young boy fishing for crabs along the marshy bank behind the Whitmore estate found a small, mud-caked lady's boot. It was of fine quality, but what caught his eye was the buckle, a small silver butterfly. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to a girl named Clara, a 16-year-old orphan with a distinctive limp whom he'd seen tending the Whitmore gardens for a few weeks. He had felt a boyish pang of sympathy for her. When he'd asked Mrs. Whitmore about Clara a week later, he was told she had been sent to live with a wealthy aunt in Savannah. The boy took the shoe to his mother, who, unnerved, brought it to Deputy Thomas Miller. Miller, a young, earnest man not yet jaded by Beaufort's stratified justice, made a note of it. It was a single, unsubstantiated data point, but it lodged in his mind. The second incident was far more alarming and came from a more credible source. Dr. Alastair Finch was called to the Whitmore mansion in late September. Isabella Whitmore had, uncharacteristically, taken to her bed with a nervous affliction. While attending to her, Dr. Finch was struck by a powerful and deeply unsettling odor coming from upstairs. It was a chemical cocktail he couldn't quite place, but it had an organic, cloying undertone of decay masked by preservatives. It reminded him of his anatomy classes in medical school, but amplified and somehow sweeter. When he inquired, a flustered Elias Whitmore attributed it to a fumigation effort to deal with termites in the attic. Dr. Finch, distracted by Isabella's state, accepted the explanation. But later that night in his office, the memory of the smell connected to another memory. Their hypothetical conversations about preserving human tissue. For the first time, a seed of profound dread was planted. He recalled Elias' morbid fascination with a new German technique of creating anatomical models using a process of plastination with wax and glycerine. He began reviewing his own patient records, cross-referencing them with the names of girls he knew had gone to the Whitmore respite. He found 4 names in his logs, girls he had treated for malnutrition or minor illnesses, who had subsequently vanished. Isabella had told him they'd all been happily placed. The final catalyst was Deputy Miller. Driven by a nagging intuition, he began discreetly speaking to the itinerant workers and freedmen living in the shanties near the port, the people Sheriff Beaumont dismissed. He heard the same story repeatedly. A daughter, a sister, a friend, desperate for help, was taken in by the Angel of Beaufort. They were seen for a few weeks, looking healthier, and then they were gone. Miller, a veteran of the bloody Seminole campaigns, knew the smell of death, and for weeks the wind from the Whitmore mansion carried it. The official explanation was the marsh, but Miller knew better. The marsh smelled of salt and organic decay. This was the smell of chemicals and rot, an industrial kind of death. He now had the shoe, Dr. Finch privately expressed concerns, and a dozen informal reports of missing girls all connected to a single address. It was a pattern that Sheriff Beaumont could no longer ignore. On October 14, 1888, armed with the slimmest of pretexts, a formal complaint about the odor filed by a neighbor at Miller's urging, Deputy Miller and a reluctant Sheriff Beaumont arrived at the Whitmore mansion. Elias was furious at the intrusion, protesting their presence as an insult to his station. While Beaumont was being placated by Elias in the parlor, Miller, acting on his own authority, made his way up the grand staircase. The smell grew stronger with every step. It was thick, gagging, a mix of formaldehyde, arsenic, and something sickly sweet like withered flowers. The top floor was silent. The door to the attic was locked fast. Ignoring the sheriff's shouts from below, Miller used the butt of his pistol to break the lock and then shouldered the heavy door open. The scene that met his eyes was one of ordered, pristine madness. The air was cool and dry, a testament to some form of ventilation system. The smell was overpowering. His lantern light swept across the first row of figures. A girl of about 20 in a blue satin dress sat perfectly upright, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were a brilliant, unblinking blue. He moved closer, the beam illuminating her face. Her skin had the waxy, translucent sheen of fine china, but it was stretched taut over the unmistakable contours of a human skull. A small, almost imperceptible seam ran along her hairline, where the scalp had been meticulously sewn back in place. He reached out a trembling hand and touched her cheek. It was cold, firm, and yielded slightly, like hardened leather. It was not porcelain. It was preserved human flesh. His light danced from one figure to the next. A girl with red hair in braids, no older than 15. A dark-haired woman whose expression was frozen in a look of mild surprise. Another with a bonnet covering most of her face as if she were shy. Each was a unique work of art. Each was a corpse. His stomach heaved. In the corner of the attic he saw the workspace. Tables laden with glass jars containing eyes of every color, spools of thread, needles, pots of wax, and bottles of chemicals labeled with Elias' neat, scholarly script. It was a laboratory, a human doll factory. He backed away, stumbling down the stairs, his face ashen. He met Sheriff Beaumont at the bottom, who was still listening to Elias' indignant protests. Miller could only manage 4 words, his voice a choked whisper. "Get him in irons. If this is giving you chills, you're not alone. The image of that attic is one that stays with you. If you believe this story needs to be heard, please take a moment to like this video and share it. These are the hidden histories that get buried for a reason, and it's up to us to bring them into the light. Let's discover together what happens next. The discovery has been made, but the true horror is only beginning to be understood. We're about to open the Whitmore family's journals and uncover the mechanics of their terrible art. The full scope of Whitmore's operation was laid bare in the days following the discovery, and the reality was more systematic and monstrous than Deputy Miller's worst nightmares could have conceived. The attic was just the showroom. The true horror was in the carriage house, in a soundproofed cellar Elias had constructed under the guise of a wine cellar. This was the workshop, and its contents revealed their entire depraved process. The physical evidence was meticulously catalogued by a stunned and sickened team of state investigators brought in from Charleston. One wall of the cellar was lined with surgical tools, saws, and implements Elias had custom-ordered from medical suppliers in Baltimore and London. Another held shelves of chemicals, barrels of arsenic, jugs of formaldehyde and glycerine, and large vats of a wax-paraffin mixture. Most disturbing was a large, zinc-lined tub fitted with a complex system of pumps and hoses. It was here investigators concluded that the true preservation took place. The process, pieced together from forensic evidence and Elias Whitmore's own chillingly detailed journals, was a perversion of both science and art. Once Isabella had selected a victim from her respite, the girl would be brought to the main house. She would be poisoned with a custom-brewed tea, a fast-acting concoction of oleander and belladonna, documented in Isabella's handwriting in a small book disguised as a recipe ledger. Death was quiet and left few visible traces. From there, the body was moved to the cellar. Elias' journals, written in a detached, scientific prose, described the next steps. The first was exsanguination. The body was placed in the zinc tub, and using a specialized pump, Elias would drain the victim of all blood, simultaneously replacing it with his own embalming fluid, a formaldehyde and arsenic solution designed to instantly halt decomposition and harden the tissues. He called this achieving foundational permanence. Next came the evisceration. All internal organs were removed through a precise incision, then either incinerated or, in some cases, preserved separately in labeled jars that were later found buried in the garden. The most horrific stage was what Elias termed the sculpting. The now hollowed body was packed with a mixture of plaster and sawdust to maintain its shape and posture. The skin was treated with a series of chemical washes to make it durable and pale, giving it the appearance of porcelain. The final, artistic touches were Elias' obsession. He would spend days on the face alone, using subtle wax injections to perfect the expression, ensuring it was serene, placid, or mildly curious, but never fearful. The eyes were removed and replaced with the custom-ordered German glass eyes, carefully selected to match the victim's original eye color. The hair was washed, treated, and styled by Isabella herself. The journals contained a note from Isabella regarding one victim, a 19-year-old named Agnes. Her hair is of a lesser quality, rather brittle. Required 2 applications of the oil treatment before it would hold a proper curl. The blue dress, however, complements her pallor quite nicely. There were no survivors to give testimony, only the silent testament of the 97 dolls found in the attic. Each was identified where possible through clothing, distinguishing marks noted in Dr. Finch's old records, or the silver butterfly buckle on Clara's boot. The timeline of their operation was established by the dates found in Elias' acquisition ledger. The first entry was dated May 1868, Specimen 1, the shepherdess, age estimated 17. The last was August 1888, Specimen 97, the gardener Clara, age 16. For 20 years, they had claimed approximately 4 to 5 victims per year, a steady, patient culling of the invisible. The most disturbing discovery, however, was a locked rosewood box found in Isabella's private study. It did not contain jewelry or heirlooms. It contained a collection of small, personal mementos from each victim. A tarnished silver locket, a pressed flower in a scrap of paper, a single baby tooth tied with a ribbon, a crudely carved wooden bird. Each item was stored in a small envelope with a number corresponding to the doll in the attic. This was not the work of a detached scientist. It was the collection of a trophy hunter. The final document in the box was not a trophy, but a business proposal. It was a draft of a letter written in Elias' hand, addressed to a Lord Harrington in London. It proposed the creation of an anatomical society of extraordinary exhibition, and outlined, in veiled but unmistakable terms, the sale of his creations to a select, private circle of international collectors. He described his pieces as the pinnacle of anthropomorphic art and included a price list. The price for a single specimen was $500, a staggering sum at the time. The attic was not just a private collection. It was inventory. The unearthing of Elias Whitmore's letter to Lord Harrington transformed the case from a local atrocity into an international conspiracy. The Charleston investigators, led by a hardened detective named Silas Blackwood, realized they were not just dealing with the madness of a single family, but the potential existence of a clandestine network of wealthy connoisseurs of the macabre. The name Lord Harrington was the first thread, and Blackwood pulled it with grim determination. Using telegraph and transatlantic mail, slow, painstaking work, Blackwood began communicating with Scotland Yard in London. Initial inquiries were met with polite skepticism. Lord Harrington was a prominent member of the House of Lords, a celebrated patron of the arts and sciences, and a close acquaintance of the royal family. The idea that he would be involved in such a grotesque enterprise was deemed preposterous. The British authorities, protective of their aristocracy, stonewalled the investigation. This resistance from powerful interests was the first major obstacle. A quote from a leaked internal memo from a Scotland Yard official read, "This is a colonial matter of a most unsavory nature. We shall not permit the reputation of a peer of the realm to be besmirched by the fanciful accusations of provincial American policemen." Back in Beaufort, the investigation faced its own threats. One night, Deputy Miller's home was broken into. Nothing was stolen but a single, pristine white porcelain doll, the conventional kind, was left sitting on his pillow. It was a clear and chilling threat. Days later, Detective Blackwood received an anonymous letter at his Charleston office containing only a newspaper clipping of an obituary for a distant cousin who had died years prior. The message was unambiguous. "We know who you are, and we know who your family is." The network was closing ranks, using intimidation to smother the inquiry. Despite the threats, Blackwood and Miller pressed on. They focused on the Whitmores' finances. Their ledgers, while meticulous, showed large, unexplained cash withdrawals and complex transactions involving foreign banks in Switzerland and Austria, highly unusual for a Southern family in that era. These financial trails pointed to other potential collectors. Cross-referencing the transactions with passenger manifests from ships docking in Charleston and Savannah, they began to build a list of names. It included a German industrialist who had visited Beaufort in 1881, an eccentric Dutch merchant who dealt in rare antiquities, and most shockingly, a prominent Boston Brahmin judge known for his vast collection of anatomical curiosities. The investigation uncovered a second location. A deed found in Elias' safe led them to a dilapidated hunting cabin deep in the cypress swamps of Colleton County, an hour's ride from Beaufort. Inside, they did not find more dolls, but rather the grim evidence of Elias' failures. This was his experimental workshop. Here, they found the partially preserved and decaying remains of at least 10 more individuals. These were the mistakes, bodies on which his techniques had failed, resulting in grotesque disfigurement or rapid decay. These victims, never perfected for the collection, were never even counted. The most profound breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A retired history professor from the College of Charleston who contacted Blackwood. He had heard the rumors of the Whitmore case and recognized a terrifying historical precedent. He provided Blackwood with archaic documents from the mid-18th century detailing a secret society in Europe known as the Flesh Sculptors Guild. This secretive cabal of wealthy aristocrats and anatomists believed that by perfectly preserving the human form at the moment of death, they could capture a fragment of the soul, creating a form of profane immortality. Their practices were nearly identical to Elias Whitmore's. The professor posited that Elias was not an inventor, but a revivalist. He was attempting to resurrect a larger, older evil, and the people he was corresponding with were likely the descendants or modern adherents of this forgotten guild. The Beaufort attic was not just a workshop for a madman. It was an audition to join a global conspiracy of unimaginable depravity. Just when we thought we'd seen it all. A secret society, international collectors, and threats from the highest levels of power. This story is spiraling into something far bigger and more terrifying than a single haunted house. If you feel the urgency of this hidden history, share this video now before it gets lost to the ages again. Let's get this out there. We are a community, a true crime family, and together we are piecing this puzzle together. The next part is the reckoning. But as we'll see, justice in a world like this is a complicated and often unsatisfying thing. The trial of Dr. Elias and Isabella Whitmore, which began in the spring of 1889, was a national sensation, dubbed the trial of the century by the ravenous penny press. Yet the legal proceedings were fraught with challenges that highlighted the limitations and corruptibility of the era's justice system. The Whitmores, represented by a high-priced legal team from Philadelphia, never once denied the existence of the collection. Instead, their defense was as audacious as it was insane. They argued that no murder had ever been committed. Their lawyers claimed that the victims were all indigents who had died of natural causes, tuberculosis, malnutrition, influenza, while under Isabella's charitable care. Elias, they argued, was merely a misunderstood scientific genius, who, in his grief, sought to honor these forgotten souls by preserving them in a state of eternal beauty through his revolutionary anatomical techniques. He was not a killer, but an artist and a scientist, and the state had no laws against this specific form of post-mortem preservation. It was a ghoulish, hair-splitting defense that played on the jury's deference to class and education. Could this soft-spoken, scholarly man truly be a monster? The prosecution, led by a fiery state attorney, presented the overwhelming physical evidence. The poison ledger, the workshop in the cellar, the tools. But the defense countered every point. The poison ledger was dismissed as a book of herbal remedies. The workshop was for his animal taxidermy. The testimony of Deputy Miller and Dr. Finch was painted as the conjecture of less sophisticated men, jealous of Elias' intellect and social standing. In the end, Elias Whitmore was found guilty, but not of 97 counts of murder. The jury, unable to fully shake the power of the Whitmore mythos, convicted him on a lesser charge of unlawful desecration of human remains, along with 2 counts of murder for the cases where the evidence of poisoning was most direct, Clara and Agnes. He was sentenced to life in prison, not death. Isabella, in a move that caused public outrage, was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. Her lawyers successfully argued she was a victim of folie à deux, a shared madness induced by her domineering husband. She was remanded to a private, luxury asylum in Virginia, where she lived out her remaining years in comfort. Justice, for most of the conspirators, was never served. Lord Harrington in London remained untouchable, dismissing the entire affair as American hysteria in a statement to the Times of London *. The German industrialist and the Dutch merchant were never formally charged, their governments refusing to cooperate. The Boston judge quietly retired from the bench, his name vanishing from the papers. The network, for all of Detective Blackwood's efforts, proved too powerful and too well-insulated to be dismantled. They simply melted back into the shadows. The societal impact on Beaufort was deep and lasting. The town's idyllic self-perception was shattered. Trust in the elite was broken, and a pall of suspicion hung over the community for decades. The Whitmore respite for young women became a cursed phrase, and genuine charitable efforts in the region suffered for years. The mansion itself was seen as so irredeemably tainted that no one would buy it. It was eventually burned to the ground by a vigilante mob in 1895, an act that many felt delivered the justice the courtroom had failed to provide. The fate of the dolls was perhaps the most tragic postscript. After being held as evidence, a debate raged over what to do with them. They could not be returned to families that didn't exist or couldn't be found. In the end, in a grim, secret ceremony, the 97 preserved bodies were buried in a mass, unmarked grave in a potter's field outside the city. Their identities and their stories were buried with them. The one lingering, unanswered question that tormented Detective Blackwood until his death was about the sales ledger. It showed several transactions marked as fulfilled. This meant that somewhere out there, in a private collection in Boston, or a manor house in the English countryside, at least 3 of Elias Whitmore's specimens were still on display, their glass eyes staring silently into a future that had completely forgotten them. The macabre history of the Whitmore family is more than a simple, gruesome tale of 2 deranged individuals. It serves as a chilling indictment of the society that allowed them to flourish. Horror was not born in a vacuum. It was incubated in a culture of rigid classism, where the lives of the poor and transient were deemed disposable, and the word of the wealthy was accepted as gospel. The town of Beaufort wasn't just fooled. On some level, it was complicit in its own deception. It chose to believe in the angel of Beaufort because the alternative, that evil could wear the face of piety and prestige, was a truth too destabilizing to confront. This case reveals a terrifying aspect of human nature, the deference we instinctively pay to power, wealth, and perceived intelligence. Elias Whitmore was not a shadowy figure lurking in alleys. He was a celebrated intellectual who used the language of science to sanitize his atrocities. Isabella was not a hag. She was a beloved matriarch who used the language of charity to procure her victims. Their story is a profound lesson in the danger of surfaces, a reminder that the most monstrous acts are often committed by those who have perfected the performance of normalcy. The lessons, it seems, were not truly learned. While the town of Beaufort was forever changed, the wider network of collectors and enablers simply vanished, protected by the same wealth and influence that had always shielded them. The legal system punished the hands that did the work, but could not touch the unseen patrons who created the demand. This pattern is not unique to the 19th century. Even today, vulnerable populations disappear from the fringes of society, and we often look to the most convenient explanation rather than the most horrifying one. The reason this story was so effectively hidden, the reason the records were sealed for a full century, was not just to protect the public from its grim details. It was an act of institutional shame management. The names implicated in Elias' ledgers and letters reached into the highest echelons of society in both America and Europe. To expose the full network would have been to admit a rot that went far beyond one family in a small southern town. It was easier to seal the records, burn the house, and let the whole affair curdle into a local ghost story, a cautionary tale told to frighten children. It was easier to bury the 97 bodies and forget. The attic is empty, the house is ash, but the questions linger in the dark. What do you think really happened to the specimens that were sold? Do you believe they could still exist, hidden away in a private vault or a forgotten wing of a European castle? Let us know your theories in the comments below. What part of this history haunts you the most? If you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, please subscribe and join our community of investigators. Thank you for having the courage to listen to the end. Your bravery in facing the darkness of the past is what makes this channel possible.